Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Journey's End, which is episode 20 of season 7 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 7th season episode Journey's End. So Journey's End is the episode in which Wesley returns to the Enterprise on vacation. Meanwhile, Picard is ordered by Admiral Nechayev to evacuate a group of Native Americans who settled this planet 20 years ago as they were looking for a new home because the Federation signed a peace treaty with the Cardassians that puts some Federation worlds under Cardassian territory and some Cardassian worlds in Federation territory, and so Picard is sent to evacuate all of them. However, when he gets there, the Native Americans do not wish to leave because they have a spiritual connection to that world and refuse to leave, and Picard is forced with the unfathomable possibility that he will be forced to remove them by force. This is complicated when Wesley goes on a vision quest for his with one of the Native Americans down there, and he decides to leave Starfleet Academy. That the path of his life is not in fact Starfleet, and he does interfere with Picard's plans to remove the Native Americans from the planet and starts a riot, and the Native Americans take some Cardassians captive, and the situation seems to get out of control, and then Wesley pulls himself out of time, and the Native American who was guiding him through a spiritual journey turns out to be none other than the Traveler, and he tells Wesley that he's going to take him through a journey of exploring different realms of the universe and time and existence and all that junk, and if Wesley wants to, and he does. So he just fucks off right in the middle of the fight that he started. And apparently, all Picard has to do is talk Golivek into standing down, to beaming his men back to his ship to de-escalate the situation because they don't want another war to happen. So the solution is the Native Americans decide to leave the Federation. Therefore, Picard is no longer has jurisdiction over them and cannot remove them by force, and Golivek promises to respect their territory and says, as long as you don't bother us, we will not bother you. And you know how much the Cardassians' word is worth, but that's not addressed in this episode. That will be addressed coming up. Anyway, so Wesley leaves and they say goodbye to him, and he goes off to be a traveler. So, I have been hinting at this episode for quite a while, because now I was trying to come up with some sort of graphic or something for this so I could use it every time there was an episode that this applied to, but I was too lazy. I was looking at it for a while, but I don't really have time for this, so maybe I'll just throw in like a voiceover or something real quick. Anyway, yes, so this is character assassination for Wesley Crusher. There were earlier instances, like, trying to remember other instances of character assassination. The episode In Theory was kind of character assassination for Data. But this is worse. This is like a killing blow character assassination for Wesley, because not only is he completely out of character in this episode, it ruins his character going forward. But yeah, so Wesley, alright, so let me start with Ronald D. Moore. Ronald D. Moore, and he talked about this when he, in the commentary for the episode First Duty, and apparently when he wrote First Duty, he really wanted Wesley to get kicked out of Starfleet and said that Starfleet wasn't the path for him and it didn't make sense for him to remain in Starfleet. And Michael Piller, very wisely, said no. Said no, he's not going to get kicked out of Starfleet. He's going to, he should be in Starfleet, which Michael Piller is correct. But apparently, since then, Ronald D. Moore had been pushing for us to do an episode where Wesley quit Starfleet. And I don't know why, but I guess what I heard is that they eventually relented to him because they wanted to do an episode that was setting up the Maquis for Voyager, which is something I'll get more into later. And apparently the deal was, okay, fine, we'll let you do your Wesley storyline, and as long as you do this other storyline to set up the Maquis. And he's like, done. And so that's why you have two storylines that have nothing to do with each other. But I was trying to do some research to figure this out, and I was not able to figure out why Michael Piller relented to Ronald D. Moore. I suspect it may have to do with the fact that he was so goddamn busy setting up Voyager, running Deep Space Nine, and even preparing for the movie Generations, which apparently the script for that had been written by this stage. But and so he was probably just too overwhelmed with all this other shit, and they didn't have enough story ideas for TNG season 7, and Ronald D. Moore kept being like, let me do it. And he was like, fine, whatever. That's my guess on this, because Michael Piller did have a quote saying that he didn't like what they did with Wesley in this episode, and that mostly that this was kind of, if Gene Roddenberry was still alive, he would be outraged about this. And there's a lot of instances where I don't give a shit what Roddenberry thinks, because sometimes he was holding the show back. But this is a case where I think he would be justified to be outraged. Because it is character assassination for Wesley. Now, I talk a lot before, and recently I've talked about some bad decisions that Michael Piller has made. And because I talked about him a lot in the channel, how I think he's a genius. He was probably the best writer for Star Trek. He saved Star Trek. He was easily the best showrunner that the franchise ever had. That he's really responsible for good Star Trek. Because his whole theme was characters first. But, he's made some mistakes. Just because I really like him that much doesn't mean he's perfect. For example, recently talked about the whole Worf and Troy relationship was his idea when Renee Echevarria wanted to put Troy and Riker together, which would have made a hell of a lot more sense, and is what they eventually did in the movies. But so I don't always agree with him, but I totally agree with him in this case. He was 100% correct that, and I only wish that he held his ground against Ronald D. Moore. Now, Ronald D. Moore, again, another writer, one of my favorite writers of Star Trek. He's responsible for a lot of good. He pushes forth continuity and having past events mean something. But one of his faults, and this is something I talk about in the past, is that he has this tendency to retcon characters. He was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had this character suddenly do this? Yeah, okay, it might be cool, but it's completely fucking out of character. I believe, I'll have to research this more when I get to it, but I believe he's responsible for the worst retcon in the Trek franchise, which is Bashir being genetically engineered. And when he was showrunner for Battlestar Galactica, they did some really heavy retcons in the final season. I was like, they clearly were never planning for that, and this actually goes against what they were setting up. And they try to make excuses to justify it, like they did with the Bashir thing, and be like, oh no, he was just hiding it the whole time, you see. But it absolutely doesn't add up. And so he has that negative tendency, even though otherwise I think he's definitely one of the best writers in Star Trek, and is responsible for a lot of good. But he has that negative tendency, and his reading on Wesley is something that I didn't understand. Like, I was just reading a quote from him, and he was saying that well, it doesn't seem that Wesley, because we're told at the start of the show that he was like this genius in mathematics and physics in the same way that Mozart was, and yet he's just going to Starfleet to follow the career that his father does. It seems like he's only doing it to please his, because that's what his father did, and he's only doing it to withhold stand up to Picard's expectations of him. And I think that is completely wrong, incorrect, and it just flat out false read of the situation. I could not disagree with Ronald D. Moore more. Sorry for that pun, but I couldn't disagree with him more. Ronald D. Moore with that. And I think Michael Piller was correct, because Roddenberry's vision for Wesley, Roddenberry basically based the character off of a younger version of himself, which is why he had such a personal attachment to it. Wesley's his middle name, apparently. And that's why he kind of like mentored Will Wheaton a lot when he was on set, and Will Wheaton had a lot of good things to say about Gene Roddenberry. But anyway, so Roddenberry's intention from the beginning was that he would be, a prodigy, pardon the pun again, and would be an upstanding member of Starfleet. And that's very clearly, extremely clearly, if you go back and watch the earlier seasons, which I have fairly goddamn recently, analyzed and watched them very carefully, very clearly they were setting Wesley up to be in Starfleet, to be a Starfleet captain, to be the future of Starfleet. That was the whole entire point of his character. Like, they should have, like, if you had a little quick one-sentence bio on each character to quickly explain. Worf is a Klingon who was raised by humans. Tasha Yar comes from a colony of, that had all these troubled planets. Data is a sentient android who is the only one of his kind. And Wesley is a young prodigy who's going to become a great Starfleet captain. That's how I think his character would so easily be summed up. And Ronald D. Moore cannot be more wrong about the bullshit about, he's just doing it to follow in his father's footsteps, and it doesn't actually make sense for him to be. No, like, his whole, like, he fucking saved, and he was like, another thing Ronald D. Moore said is that, he was wasted being at the helm. He's supposed to be this genius in physics and all this other stuff in mathematics, so why is he just being a pilot and flying the ship? Hey, were you not paying attention in all those episodes when he saved the whole fucking universe? I mean, okay, maybe the universe is an exaggeration, that's hyperbole, but the Enterprise, he single-handedly saved the ship like at least 4 times. And it's usually through mathematic genius. And he usually, even if he's not saving the ship, he's creating an entire sentient civilization of fucking nanites. That was my biggest issue with Wesley, is that he was too much of a super genius. So what in the hell is Ronald D. Moore talking about? We wasted, he's just sitting at the helm flying the ship. No, he's not. He's saving the fucking ship every week, or creating sentient life forms, or coming up with brilliant engineering ideas that tons of adults who went through Starfleet Academy couldn't figure out, and he's being smarter than them. What in the hell is he talking about? Wesley is very clearly on the path of being an amazing Starfleet officer. He's already, as a young person before he even went to the academy, being a better Starfleet officer than other Starfleet officers. Very clearly, that is the fucking path that they set him on. And I am really just upset that Michael Piller didn't stand his ground more, because I think he clearly saw this. And I think he just got, I don't know why, but my theory is that he was too overwhelmed and just got too overwhelmed. It's like when a kid is like, keeps poking at you, Mom, can I do this? Can I do it? Can I do it? Can I do it? Can I do it? And eventually you're like, fine, leave me alone. That's my guess. That Ronald D. Moore in this case was the kid and Michael Piller was the adult. But he should have been a better parent to the show of Star Trek and said no. And there's other cases. I've heard other cases where Ronald D. Moore and some of these other writers, again, who I really like, but, everyone is not perfect. And they would have dumb ideas occasionally that Michael Piller would very correctly go, no. And he actually made the show better by doing that, by knowing when to say no, knowing when ideas worked and when they didn't. And he should have said no here. He should have continued to say no, and should have said absolutely not. This goes against Wesley's character. We are not doing it. And the whole thing with the Traveler, and I remember thinking this when I very first saw this episode too, when I was 15, 14, whatever. 94, I would have been 15. Yeah, 15. Or what time of year? Yeah, 15, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, when I first saw this episode, I remember thinking, that's not what the Traveler meant. When they were trying to say, when the Traveler said that you were a genius like Mozart in mathematics, and maybe this is what he meant. You're meant for something more than Starfleet. Very fucking clearly, in that episode, he was intending, he didn't mean that Wesley would be like, leave humanity. He meant that he would work in better humanity and be the best of humanity. In other words, stay in Starfleet. That was heavily fucking implied. God damn it. And so this is, when I did my list of top 10 retcons, I don't think I remembered to put this one in. I should have. This is one of the worst retcons of the entire franchise, and it is a retcon. As Ronald D. Moore, as great as a writer as he is, but as Ronald D. Moore not understanding the character of Wesley. And plus Ronald D. Moore has a very different view of young people in Starfleet than I do. I think he's basing it off of his own college experiences, and he was like in a frat and with fraternity people, and thinking of maybe what military kids are like nowadays. And I've met a lot of people who've went to the Navy or the Marines, and that's not the kind of personalities or kind of people that Starfleet have. You can call Starfleet a military organization if you want. I don't care. It does serve that purpose, and it does have that same command structure. But it functions differently than modern day military. And the personalities and the kind of people who inhibit it is definitely meant to be different than, and that's something a few writers from Star Trek, Nicholas Meyer as being one of them, and Ronald D. Moore, I believe, being another, who don't really get that and base it too much off of modern day military. But that's actually another discussion entirely. It doesn't have that much to do with this episode. But I mean, it's relevant in so much that it goes to show that Ronald D. Moore doesn't get the young characters of Star Trek, particularly Wesley. And plus, his whole reasoning was, well, they don't have many characters in Star Trek who actually don't go in Starfleet. It seems like Starfleet is the big thing and everybody has to do it, but it's not the only option. It's not the only path. There's other paths to go. So why don't we have a young person who doesn't go in Starfleet? Jake! Because I'm watching this in order, I know that the episode Shadowplay came out before this episode. I mean, who knows which one was written first, because it was around the same time, because it was not that long ago I reviewed the episode Shadowplay. In Shadowplay, Jake decided not to go into Starfleet and to buck expectations of his father. So, to be fair, Ronald D. Moore probably wasn't aware of that, because I heard that when they were writing TNG and DS9, they didn't really talk to each other, and they weren't really paying attention to what the other one was doing. Like Michael Piller and Brick Berman were supposed to be overseeing both of them, but that one, they probably didn't do it because they were so busy with so much shit. They probably didn't do a good enough job of communicating that to Ronald D. Moore, that, hey, you don't need to worry about doing a storyline about, you know, a young kid bucking his father's expectations and not joining Starfleet, because we already fucking did that over in Deep Space Nine. He's acting like, oh, it's something we've never done before, but it was just done like a couple episodes ago. So this is so frustrating. And on top of all that, okay, so now I haven't even gotten to the future stuff. So the things, and I'll give the spoilers now for Modern Trek if you haven't seen it, but you might say like, oh, this wasn't such a bad thing because it led to Wesley and Prodigy, and Prodigy season 2 was a good season, and Wesley was a really great character. They did make good use of the whole Traveler thing, and he was an interesting character. They apparently based him a bit off of Doctor Who, and you could make the argument that what they did with Wesley, making him this, you know, magical being or whatever, who was very eccentric and out there, would have been more interesting had he just been a, you know, Starfleet captain. But I don't know. I think that's debatable. But my bigger point is, it's still not the character they were setting up throughout the first 4 seasons of TNG, first 5. So it is a retcon that started here. It's similar to the Bashir genetically engineered thing, because they did some good storylines with Bashir being genetically engineered. So does that justify the retcon? No, it doesn't. It's still a stupid retcon because it doesn't hold up, even if they did good things with it later. And it's the same thing with Wesley. Even if they did, you know, they used him well in Prodigy season 2, doesn't justify this retcon, in my humble opinion. And they were basically, you know, I haven't seen the show, so I wouldn't know exactly, but from what I hear, they were basically just trying to make him like Doctor Who, and in some cases, and plus, not only did they retcon his character here, what they did in future seasons, and I think Modern Trek, that is, and I think Prodigy, if I remember season 2, it was going off of the same thing that Picard season 2 was going off with Wesley, where they completely 1,000% retconned the Travelers. And they're like, oh, the Travelers are a group of people who oversee the timeline and make sure everyone's safe and we protect everyone. No, what the fuck are you talking about? Alright, so the Traveler was from a planet that viewed humans and other, you know, humanoid species similar to humans, you know, Klingons, Romulans, all of them, viewed them as uninteresting, unimportant, and kind of boring. They don't really give a shit about them. But he was actually kind of fascinated by this, so he referred to himself as a traveler because he liked to travel around the galaxy and sort of experience and learn more about different people and live with them. Kind of like if you think of a traveler like a lot of world travelers that I've met, because I've been in well, not that many countries, but I used to live in New Zealand for a while, and I'd meet a lot of people who were traveling around the world from different parts of the world who travel around the world, go to Europe, Australia, Japan, and then they come to New Zealand with all these tales of where they've been, and they do it to experience what that life is like and to experience the other places and to learn about their cultures. That's why he's called a traveler. He is a traveler. Not so much as an explorer, because an explorer is different. Explorer is what Starfleet is that they're going to the unknown. They're going to places that is not known to their society or cultures and learning about it and bringing that information back to their own culture and society. It's like, look what we discovered. Here's this other culture out here that does this thing this way. Whereas a traveler is going to places that are already known quantities, places that we already know about, that we could, like, if I wanted to learn about Japan, I could just sit at home and read, a freaking book, or go online and read all these historical documents and read about their culture, but that's different than actually experiencing it. So that's what a traveler does. The traveler goes out and experiences known quantities for themselves. So that's what this guy, who refers to himself as, and by the way, he always said a traveler in the first episode. It wasn't until Remember Me where they started calling him the Traveler. That's just because they didn't have another name for him, because his name apparently is unpronounceable by humans. So it's just what he called himself, because he likes to travel. He likes to go to known quantities that most of the people from his race think are boring and uninteresting, but he's actually curious about it and to learn about their primitive ways, because they don't understand the complexities of time and space and thought like he does. But he finds sort of a bit of wonderment in their ignorance or whatever. And he saw in Wesley a prodigy, again, sorry, someone who could understand those things and wanted to nurture those feelings, but not sort of interfere with his natural development. And in this episode, by taking him away from Starfleet, taking him away from humanity, he's 1000% interfering. That's all he's fucking doing. So this is the first retcon. This is the first chain since it laid the first century. Oh, what was that Picard quote? The first something forged, the first chain, the first speech censored. This is the first step in the retcon, because this is totally out of character for the Traveler, totally not only out of character for Wesley, but also out of character for the Traveler, for stealing him away from his own people, which is what he was supposed to help humanity grow. How is he supposed to fucking do that if you're like, no, I'm going to steal you away and we're going to experience all these different forms of time and thought and everything like that? That is doing the one thing he said he didn't want to do, is fucking interfering with his natural development. He wanted him to develop naturally. Again, implied as the Starfleet officer, which is why fucking Picard made him an acting ensign in that very same episode. But anyway, the Monotrack retconned the Travelers even more, so the retcon began here. But here, in this episode, they didn't imply that the Travelers, like, there's a whole group, and they retconned it in fucking Picard Season 2, and I guess Prodigy Season 2 was written first, so maybe they retconned it first, where the Travelers were a group of people who guide the galaxy and guard time and space and protect people from, people who would mess with time and space and whatnot. Like, that's not what the word Traveler means. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, that has nothing to do with anything. It's a retcon because they wanted to use Wesley's character in a certain way, and if he's traveling the galaxy, just eating people's food and learning their culture, it's harder to integrate that into a storyline. So they got to make them these guardians. They're more like guardians of the galaxy, if that phrase wasn't already used. They're more like that than they are fucking travelers. So it is a terrible retcon, and it began here. And I even said that one time when I was talking about Prodigy Season 2. I think in my review for Prodigy Season 2 was railing against that retcon. I was like, to be fair, the retcon actually started in TNG with this goddamn episode, Journey's End, because it ruined his character. Now, I also mentioned there was an opportunity for this retcon to be retconned out. And that is in the movie Nemesis, where Wesley can be seen wearing a Starfleet uniform at Riker and Troy's wedding. Now, in the theatrical release of that, or the final cut, I should say, of that movie, that's all you see. You just see him at the background. At the wedding. So you could always there's some beat canon, and everyone can have their head canon about why Wesley's in a Starfleet uniform. You could say, well, the beat canon thing said he showed up naked, and Picard's like, oh, I got nothing for you to wear except this old lieutenant uniform. And so he wears the lieutenant uniform to the wedding, which yeah, fucking replicators. You can replicate him whatever clothes you want, so that's a bullshit excuse. But the deal is that there is a scene filmed that was deleted from the movie, and god damn, I wish to high hell they didn't delete this scene, because in this scene Wesley is, I can't even remember who he's talking to, but he's talking to someone about how he has been assigned to the USS Titan with Riker. So he's going to be on the Titan as a lieutenant because he's in Starfleet. And then Wesley's talking about like flirting with some other women. He's like, excuse me for a moment. So as much as a lot of people like to rail on Nemesis, personally, I think that movie is a lot better than people give it credit for. But the writer of that movie was going to correct the mistake that Ronald D. Moore made in this episode. He was going to retcon it out of existence. Now, if they actually kept that scene in the movie, that would have been, they would have saved Wesley's character. Now, it's possible that Prodigy could have ignored that and retconned that out of existence and been like, oh, no, he's a traveler, that scene doesn't exist. But if they did have that scene where he was the lieutenant serving on the Titan, imagine the possibilities. You could have on Lower Decks, when Boimler went to join the Titan, you could have had Wesley as lieutenant on the fucking Titan. I personally, as great as he was in Prodigy, I would have rather seen that. I would have, because it would have made more sense for his goddamn character, and we don't have to retcon the Travelers even more to be like, oh, they're a group of guardians that protect time and space. No, they're fucking not. It's just one dude who likes to travel around and do sightseeing. And so I so wish that I am so pissed off with whoever decided to. It was probably that Stuart Bard, director of Nemesis, who doesn't know shit about Star Trek. It's probably his decision to fucking edit that out of the film. Because he's a professional editor, so he's probably like, oh, I don't see the relevance. This scene doesn't really help the movie, but it helps the franchise. It helps the franchise. It would have saved Wesley's character if you would have made it. And even if that scene was in there, you could people could have headcanon to be like, well, maybe he went with the Traveler and learned what he needed to learn, and it's like, oh, this is all good. I actually decided I want to go back to Starfleet. Maybe that was his spiritual journey, that he wasn't ready to join Starfleet at that time, but after going through his journey and seeing the world, he's like, you know what? I think I do belong to Starfleet. Done! done! And then that would have fixed everything. That would have fixed everything. And you know what? That's kind of what I did. I didn't go to college when I was 18, 20. I don't think I was ready for it. Instead, I traveled the country, saw different parts, experienced life. Then I traveled, not the whole world, but went to the South Pacific, New Zealand, Australia, traveled around there, and then I went to college. After I sort of got life experience, and I actually had a much better, like I would have flunked out of college full stop if I went. I was not ready when I was 18. But because I had that life experience and then went to college, I actually did a really, I was not struggling at all. I was actually finding it kind of easy compared to some of my counterparts who were 18, 19. They were struggling. I'm like, why are you struggling? I think it's quite easy to understand, but I think that's because I was older and I had more life experience. So they could have done that storyline with Wesley. They could have been like, you know what, I'm not ready now, but after, experiencing the galaxy and time and space and different dimensions, I'm now ready to now that I understand more, I'm ready to be a part and help humanity, which is the whole point of this goddamn character, was to be a part of humanity, not to be separate, not to join some other group that guards the galaxy. No! He was supposed to be a goddamn Starfleet Captain. Sorry, I'm getting very angry, as you can tell. But yeah, even if Nemesis did fix this retcon, this episode would still suck. Because this episode is still a retcon in itself. At least, there was that possibility, though, that Nemesis could have saved this episode. But anyway, so all this time ranting about Wesley, I haven't even gotten into the bulk of the episode. But besides the fact that, they retcon the Travelers and they retcon Wesley's, motivation to leave Starfleet, his whole character arc in this episode is just to be an annoying little shit. And that in itself is completely 100%. Again, this is why it's character assassination. They assassinated his fucking character in this episode. Is complete character assassination. He shows up and be like, oh, you suck, Jordy. Your things suck. Like, here's the thing. When I was 17, and if I compare to when I was 17 to when I was 21, I was a totally different person. So I understand that, especially at that young age, when you're coming of age and coming from a teenager into an adult, that your personality changed. Like, you change a lot. I get that. People do that all the time. I would totally understand that. Like, when I was 17, I was very immature and depressed and kind of gothic and, did a lot of drugs and well, mainly just weed, but, acid from time to time. But anyway, compared to when I was 21, I was married, I was more mature, I didn't do any drugs, I stopped smoking cigarettes, I only drank on occasion, sometimes I got really drunk though, but still, only on occasion, and I was, a bit more, just understood and wasn't like so depressed. I had a brighter look on life. I was practically a different person. So I understand that, but, and this is the same argument when people try to make this stupid fucking argument with me with Nog, when I rightfully point out how out of character Nog is in later seasons compared to earlier seasons, which I'll get to. And I'll probably have to mention this whole thing again. But if people try to make that excuse with Wesley, it's like, oh, it's not out of character for him, he's just matured. Bullshit! Here's the thing, and it's bullshit with Nog too, because yes, I understand, especially from my personal history, I totally understand that someone could completely change their personality, but even when I was 21, I still was me. I still had shared a lot of traits with my 17-year-old self, even though I had changed a lot. I still felt the same, acted the same, like it was still me. And so what they're doing with Wesley and Nog is making it so they're not at all the same person. I understand, yes, people mature, people can grow, and different people, but you don't turn into a completely 100% different person. That doesn't fucking happen. And this is what they did in this episode with Wesley. It's what they did with Nog in later seasons of TNG, or DS9. I will get to that. He is not natural maturing character growth that people actually go through. It is bullshit, bad writing. People don't understand their fucking characters and just decide to write a different character and call them by the same name. Breathe. Anyway, so let's talk about the Maquis aspect of this episode. It was okay. It was. I remember because I was naive when I first saw this episode that I thought, or when Voyager first came out, I was like, oh, they're bringing a Native American character, so they're basing it off of that other episode from TNG. Oh, that's clever of them. Not really aware of like the timeline of things, and plus when you're that young, time seems to go by a lot slowly, so years seems like a really, really long time. So surely they hadn't have thought up of Chakotay all the way back when they wrote this episode, but you know how naive I was, because they actually came up with the idea for Voyager in between seasons 6 and 7 of TNG. Now, it was mostly like hidden between like Jerry Taylor, Michael Piller, and Rick Berman. They didn't start making it public until later, but they had already came up with the idea, the general idea. Like some of the details would change, of course, but they already came up with the general idea of Voyager. And by the time they got to this episode, they did have most of Voyager, the premise of the show, down pat. And so yeah, they created this they wrote this episode with the express purpose of setting up for the idea of Chakotay and the idea of the Maquis. Now, I already addressed the Maquis, how that was created to set up Voyager, in my review of the Maquis, so I won't rehash that here. But it's funny, but though with Chakotay, I've heard I read several things online of people saying, "Oh, it's implied that Chakotay came from this world, even though it's never explicitly stated in the show." I'm like, that's fucking obvious. I thought that was fucking obvious. Like, as soon as I saw Chakotay, or as soon as I even heard about the character of Chakotay, I'm like, oh, he's from that planet of Native Americans. I mean, obviously. I don't know why people would even doubt it. Like, I guess it's implied this if you really want to. No, it's fucking obvious. Clearly he's from this planet. Like, why the else would they introduce this planet? But anyway. And plus, the planet, why would he not be from the planet? I'm not saying that all Native Americans live on this planet, but they have a reason to attack the Cardassians. They're in the demilitarized zone where the Maquis exist, and they're attacking Cardassians in this episode. Obviously, he's from this goddamn planet. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway. Anyway, sorry, I'm so upset over that Wesley thing. But anyway, so there's an interesting discussion to get into about evacuating people who don't want to leave, because when I covered the episode Ensigns of Command, I just talked about how these guys were idiots and they should just fucking leave. Did something similar to Maquis, and again, I won't rehash it, but when I covered the Maquis, I talked about how they're actually in the wrong because they live in a post-scarcity society, and the Federation could set them up with a perfect replacement colony with all the resources and that they would need. So there's no reason to fucking fight the Cardassians, and that they're being selfish by doing so. But this episode actually does get a little hairy when it comes to Native Americans. Now, they say they have spiritual attachment to the planet, But when I covered the episode Sanctuary on DS9 not that long ago, the whole reason they wanted to settle in Voyager was because of their religion, their spiritual beliefs, and my response to that was fuck your spiritual beliefs. When you're presented with a perfect paradise planet as opposed to a planet that's in turmoil and limited resources, take the fucking paradise planet. Don't screw everyone over because of your spiritual beliefs. But, with this situation, I actually I don't know if I go as far as to say that I side with the Native Americans, but I do think that the situation's a lot more complicated in this instance, because not only do they have spiritual attachment to this world and they're being told to leave by a government on the other side of the galaxy, because they made some peace agreement with some other aliens without, apparently there was, I wouldn't say without their consent, because apparently there was a Native American representative there during the peace negotiations according to Admiral Nechayev, but they didn't fucking listen to him. They overruled him, and so now they're all being told to leave. And on top of that, the bigger thing that gets me is the history of, and it's something that's addressed in this episode, of Native Americans being forced relocated, and that they're it has that historical context to it, which makes it a bit heavier, in my opinion, than the other examples in Star Trek that I gave. So I think it does make it a hell of a lot more complicated. So that is an interesting thing to play off of. Because I do kind of see both sides. I do see Starfleet's side. As some people talk about Nechayev, like, I've always talked about Admiral Nechayev like she's a bad admiral. She's an idiot, I called her. She asked, no, she didn't ask. She demanded that Captain Picard commit genocide against the Borg the next chance he gets. And plus she removed Riker from duty and put Jellicoe on board, a guy who had no fucking idea how to command the Enterprise and almost ruined the whole goddamn mission. So she's so I always rail against her for being a very bad, stupid admiral. But in this episode, I actually don't have any complaints about her. I can understand her position in this case. In fact, like, she even tells Picard, like, I totally agree with you, and I made the same arguments to the Federation, but they overruled me, so we now have to enact the order. She's like, her hands are tied in the same way that Picard's hands are tied. And again, getting into my talk of the Maquis, I can understand the Federation's position here, that the avoiding war is no small thing. It is definitely something that is worthwhile. I mean, I've heard other people be like, oh, they avoid war too much. They avoid war at such big cost. But let's compare the cost. The cost is these colonists have to move to another world where they'll be given all the resources and all the help and all the money and all the house and all the food and everything they need, and they can just rebuild their society with all the help that they want or don't want, compared to a war which millions of people could die. Like, there's no fucking comparison. It's easy. It's easy. You want to avoid the war. Easy comparison. And so I totally disagree with the people who think the Federation made the wrong decision. So I actually think they made the right decision. But, again, I can see the Native Americans' perspective on that, and that's more complex. I do think that Picard would have had removed them. I think he would have been in the right to do so, but I see why he wouldn't want to, and I see the implications for that, and I see the historical context for that and how terrible that is, but I would call it a necessary evil. So I'm kind of with Nechayev in this one. But even though I do also see the Native Americans' perspective. But here's the thing. I don't really think the way this episode's resolved makes a lot of sense. Because they say, oh, well, our answer to the situation after it already got out of control and they took Cardassians hostage and whatnot, and the fighting broke out. Our answer to this problem is we're just going to leave the Federation. Well, got a question for you. If that's all you had to do to solve the situation, why didn't you just fucking do that in the first place? Like, why wait until there's a conflict, until fucking take Cardassians hostage or whatnot? Like, why not just do that immediately? And then one dude going to Picard is like, you redeemed yourself. You wiped clear the blood of your ancestor. But what did Picard do? Picard didn't do shit. It was you that came up with the solution. And why didn't you just do that solution earlier? And as we will soon see, with the Maquis, the solution actually sucks. It's not actually a good solution. And it doesn't work because the Cardassians proceed to terrorize all the colonies that remain in Cardassian space, including this one, as we know, with Chakotay. There is a non-canon novel, but it was written by Jerry Taylor, one of the creators of Voyager, that tells the backstory of Chakotay and how his father was killed by the Cardassians, and so that's why he joined the Maquis. And so that's the result. There are people, so this is not really a solution. And so nothing's really resolved in this episode. And they could have just done this in the first place. Therefore, this whole episode is just a big-ass waste of time. And what else is there to say about this episode? There's Nechayev and Picard, like, making her a nice breakfast, and her being like, oh, thank you for the breakfast, and thank you for making me feel welcome. Like, that was okay. That was fine. Doesn't change the fact she sucks. Oh, yeah, the Maquis, which happens after this episode, that the episode of the Maquis is another example where Nechayev would be an idiot and, like, underestimate just how volatile the Maquis situation is. She's a bad admiral. This episode is probably the best example of her where she's not actually being a bad admiral. But I don't know much about the detail of Native American culture. I'm only got a very pedestrian passing knowledge, so I not really qualified to speak to how accurate this episode is, and I often wondered that myself, but I think I've heard from people who do know more that it's not very accurate at all. There's a whole thing with Voyager where they hired the advisor who turned out to be a fraud and was just telling them bullshit about Native American culture. But that's a Voyager thing. But anyway. But I could definitely see, judging this episode and how the Native Americans are portrayed, that this could be completely inaccurate representation of them. But as I said, I don't know one way or the other, so I won't. But I could see that being the case. Anyway, so I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel very much so. And so I'd like to give a big special thanks to Jordan Johnson, Brandon Neilhouse, and Antarius. Thank you all so very, very much for your strong support. Also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie 091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Manny Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguel Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, and Brenton Berg. And Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a few comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Journey's End, more like Star Trek Insurrection, but where Picard doesn't stand up for the people being displaced. Seriously, that's what this episode makes me think of with a magical Wesley Crusher side quest. I wish that Wesley hadn't left the Traveler. He should have left with Vic Fontaine. Imagine seeing the Delta Quadrant with Vic Fontaine by your side. Imagine making a daring escape from the stupid Borg city and the Borg Queen saying, Fontaine! Imagine Wesley being able to truthfully say, well, I'm not in Starfleet. All I'm saying is more like booty crap. Well, actually, Wesley can still say, I'm not in Starfleet. But anyway, we don't see him do that. So here's the difference I'll make between Insurrection and this episode. Because I actually agree with Picard's decisions in Insurrection, but that's a different situation, because in this episode the Federation made a peace treaty that could save millions of lives, and Picard needs to uphold that peace treaty in order to prevent war, which is why he doesn't side with the people being displaced. In Insurrection, the Federation made an agreement with a shady alien who was also sort of aligned with the Dominion in order to steal a technology from a planet that's inhabited by a group of people that would give people the fountain of youth and make people live for much, much longer, which is not really something that humanity is meant to do, and they would be stealing this technology, so that's immoral. So what Starfleet was doing in Insurrection was totally wrong and should be fought against. What they were doing here is not the best situation, but understandable, and they were withholding peace. So not to get all serious with your funny joke, but that is how I see it. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says the depiction of Native Americans is not the worst, but still has issues, and especially their story of their wish to keep their colony and not give up their home to the Cardassians that gets forgotten as Wesley chooses to freeze time and then heads out with the Traveler while off screen. Somehow the Native Americans agree to simply live in Cardassian territory, although they likely joined the Maquis and then perished in the Dominion War, but that's the whole other thing. As for Wesley's story, meh. Interesting as it is for Wesley to choose a different path, throwing this part of this conflict just muddles things and really leaves the conclusion of Wesley's arc just being out there, which is especially disappointing after his strongest episode, First Duty. So at best, I'd call this episode half-baked and just below average. 4 canopies for Badmiral Nechayev out of 10. So here's the thing. We can speculate because we're never told what happens to Dorvan 5 or these Native Americans in the future, knowing when we know what happens with the Maquis and the Cardassians. There's possibilities. We don't know, because we don't know if this whole colony joined the Maquis or if it was just certain members of the colony could have been aiding, joining the Maquis, but not all of them were on board with it. Maybe the main council that controlled the colony was against it. We don't know. And maybe when Eddington started, poisoning other planets and Cardassian planets, and Cisco started poisoning Maquis planets, maybe at that stage they're like, you know what? This shit's getting out of hand. Let's get the hell out of here and find ourselves another place to live. Maybe at that part the stakes had just gone too high. I don't know. I'm just making shit up. But the point is, we don't know. And when the Cardassians joined the Dominion, there said we will wipe out any Maquis colony still in our territories. So maybe at that stage, they're like, yeah, let's get the fuck out of here. Cardassians are coming to kill us all. Let's get out. Maybe some of them got out before they were destroyed. Because said they were focusing on Maquis colonies, so you could surmise that if they weren't a Maquis colony, they just were a colony that some people happened to be in the Maquis. Maybe the Cardassians were not prioritizing a world like that, and they were prioritizing the ones with Maquis bases. And so maybe they had enough time to escape before the Cardassians wiped them out. I'm trying to be optimistic here, trying to give you some other possibilities. The point is never addressed in the show. We don't know. My headcanon is they got out alive because I like to be optimistic. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, this episode is completely destroys and ruins Wesley's character as a character. Completely destroys and ruins Wesley Crusher as a character, and all the build-up from the very first episode of the show is all ruined and retroactively makes Wesley one of the worst characters in the entire Star Trek franchise. Now, don't worry, Mark, he is not worse than Vic Fontaine, and as a matter of fact, Vic Fontaine is the worst character of the franchise. But as I was saying, we see Wesley's character growth from each of the 4 seasons, and some in season 5, to be fair, and this undermines everything. The attitude that he displays is unlike him, and I don't believe that he would quit Starfleet at all. And yes, I don't believe that when the Traveler from season 1 was saying that Wesley was important and will do many great things, I seriously doubt this is what was foreshadowed. I'm sorry, but I don't buy it. And also, I don't believe that Wesley would believe a vision that his father would encourage him to make his own path. Yes, this is the first episode where the Maquis begins, and to be honest, it wasn't a good introduction to them. So my rating is a 2 out of 10. You know, just to clarify, not saying you're wrong, but just to clarify, yeah, so this is where the Maquis begins, but the Maquis are formed in the episode The Maquis. They don't exist yet, but this is sort of setting up. It's setting up the situation, the demilitarized zone and everything that will eventually lead to the Maquis being a thing. But as of yet, that's not a thing. Yes, 100% agree with you about Wesley. This completely ruins his character, and you don't need to tell me that Vic Fontaine's the worst character in Star Trek, because that's like saying water is wet and and we breathe air. That's just a given. It's a given that he's the worst character in the Star Trek franchise. I know there's a lot of people out there that are wrong, that don't acknowledge this fact of life, but it is a fact of life. So, yeah, you don't really need to state it. I know what you would say. Anyway, so, yeah, but I don't know if I agree that it retroactively ruins his whole character. I never really liked his character before that all that much. But it does ruin his character. It does. Going forward. Like, as much as I do enjoy Prodigy Season 2, it's not what was meant to him. It's not what was meant for him. It's a bad retcon. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, "Oh dear, this does not age well. I'm not sure which is more annoying, Wesley being a moody, resentful young man, the wise and spiritual Native Americans who all dress and speak in a similar fashion, Picard having to atone for the sins of an ancestor, or the return of the Traveler. And Admiral Bitchface is back. I call this episode Star Trek Insurrection Light." Thus was the Maquis born. Fun facts, Ned Romano, the man who plays Antwara. God damn it, Brandon, why are you making me pronounce this shit? Anyway, sorry. The man who plays Antwara in this episode previously played the Klingon named Krell in A Private Little War and will play Chakotay's crazy grandfather in the Star Trek Voyager episode The Fight. Another winner of an episode. According to canon, Chakotay is descended from the Native Americans on Dorvan 5. Yawn. 3 Balerian canopies. Is it Balerian canopies out of 10? He's not descended from the Native American. He was living on Dorvan 5. Like, again, I thought that was obvious, but anyway. Well, no, he was in Starfleet at the time, but he was from Dorvan 5. I should clarify. But anyway, yeah, so I heard that actor was also played Chakotay's grandfather in The Fight, but I didn't hear that he was in A Private Little War. Funny how he only shows up in bad episodes. Yeah, and the way Wesley's behaving in this episode, not only is it out of character, it's just so fucking annoying. Like, they turn him into, like, the annoyingest, angsty, fuck you, mom, teenager that's just like... and Will Wheaton doesn't do a good job of it. And to be fair, it's not the type of character he's used to playing. I know, he does play, like, in, like, an angsty... sort of misbehavior or whatever in the episode Toy Soldiers, and he does a pretty good job of that, but it just doesn't fit with Wesley, and so he doesn't know how to do Wesley, and because it's just badly written. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I really like this episode even if Wesley is being a complete asshole. Maybe he stayed friends with Nicholas Locarno, as I believe that Wesley is a dumb idiot and that doesn't have a clue about the real world. Nicholas Locarno was able to manipulate Wesley. Am I being too harsh on poor Wesley? Not really, as I know someone like this. As I said this before about this person, he is smart and dumb. Meaning book smart and not very clever with life. Wesley's character was always hated for being a genius and saver of the universe. In this episode, he became an asshole and people still hate him. Was Wesley's character destroyed in this episode? No, it wasn't. The first Duty episode did that for me. He didn't only lie, he tried to cover up something more shocking, the death of his friend. He only told the truth when his acting daddy Picard gave him one of his speeches. But Picard's speeches are so good. But anyway, sorry. The Traveler's storyline doesn't make any sense. Did he quantum leap into this Indian? Did he replace this person, or did he transform him into an Indian and settle down on this planet for years waiting for Wesley to come? My personal favorite was he was like Al Kalaviki and only Wesley could see him. Oh, are you talking about, is that Al from Quantum Leap? Anyway, the Maquis didn't start from this episode, as preemptive strike is 4 episodes away, which means 4 weeks has gone by. I will generously and say 2 months. There's no way they can set up all those bases as fast. As we know, one season of Star Trek is like 1 year in the franchise. So I believe the Maquis might have started after the episode The Wounded, hence in the background like Section 31. So my rating is 8. The introduction of Voyager really makes the timeline of the Maquis weird. I will look at star dates while I'm babysitting a kitten on Friday out of 10. So, yeah. A year of, like, a season of Star Trek is supposed to be a calendar year, but that doesn't mean that every episode equals a week. they sometimes really play with the timeline. They don't keep track of it, I will say, for one thing. And so, you mentioned the episode Preemptive Strike, but the episode The Maquis comes before Preemptive Strike. And that episode is when the Maquis was created. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Maquis actually isn't created yet. They do not exist yet in this episode. And here's the thing. When you say, oh, where'd they get all their bases from? They're just using like buildings and colonies and resources that they already have. Like they already have these ships. They are acquiring more weapons and stuff, which is what we see in episodes like Preemptive Strike and the Maquis, where you have that Vulcan come on board DS9 and go to Quark and try to get weapons because they don't have that much supplies because they were just formed. And as for bases, they just use pre-existing places and turn them into bases, pre-existing colonies, which is why they kind of hide within civilian structures, kind of like you hear about with, Al-Qaeda or fucking, what's the other one? Hamas. How they talk about, they use civilians' shields, as shields, because they have to, because they don't, if they put their bases out in the open, the bases will just get destroyed, and so they have to hide within civilian populations. And so I figure that it's probably something similar with the Maquis. They use already established civilian structures as bases, and that's why we see in episodes like the Maquis and the Preemptive Strike that they're going out very hard out trying to get more weapons because they don't have that much, trying to get more ships because they don't have that much to begin with. So in other words, I totally disagree that the Maquis did not form after the Wounded, that they clearly, as I think is established in canon, whether it makes sense or not, which I think it does, but regardless, even if it doesn't make sense, that's clearly what the writers intended, is that the Maquis formed in the episode The Maquis. Not even in this episode. They weren't even existed yet. And Preemptive Strike, they were still young. They still didn't have that many ships and that many bases. But anywho, you said something here I totally disagree with. Wesley's character, you think it wasn't destroyed in this episode and that First Duty was worse. Yeah, I completely respectfully disagree with you on that one, because I actually think what they did with Wesley's character in the First Duty, whether you think it's worse or not, makes more sense for his character. I see how he would justify this in his mind, and because of his loyalty to his friends, and that's why he would sort of cover up, but he would justify to himself, I'm not really doing anything wrong. I think that's totally within character for Wesley. In fact, I think that was one of the best episodes for Wesley's character. Another area where we disagree. Whereas what he does here, where he acts like all moody and shit and says, I want to quit Starfleet out of nowhere, makes zero sense. Now, to be fair, there is a way they could have made him wanting to quit Starfleet make sense if they referenced the First Duty, if they'd be like, everyone's treating me like shit, and life has been different since I, got caught from doing that. But they didn't. At the very least, if they wanted to get him to quit Starfleet, they could have done that. But then on top of that, they retconned the Travelers. So, gotta respectfully disagree with you on this one. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, one problem which doesn't occur for the first time is that although this is supposed to be a planet, it is treated as, and we only see a single village. If it is only this village, or maybe a couple of villages, it should be possible to reach an agreement with the Cardassians, since there would be completely of free space left on a normal-sized planet. Of course, the situation especially is delicate due to the history of the settlers, but should the Federation go to war because of these colonists, or if necessary, sacrifice to preserve peace, why do they settle so close to the Cardassian border in the first place? Another problem is the whole time it seems like there are only two alternatives, but then suddenly there is a third possibility to solve the situation. The whole Wesley plot was disappointing. His rude attitude towards his friends was very annoying. His sudden ability to freeze time continued. The Wesley is an Ubermensch, sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that word, plot line of the first season that I didn't like at all. Later, he is seen in Insurrection, that's actually Nemesis, but no worries, without any explanation. Next week on TNG, after the big success with the Admiral, Picard quits Starfleet to open a catering business. My rating is a 6 out of 10. So, the village, by the way, I talked about in my review of Thine Own Self that I surmised that that same set was reused in this episode, and it was. I got confirmation. But my bigger guess was it was also reused in Preemptive Strike. So we'll find out when I do the research for episode if that's true as well. Pretty sure it is. Also, I forgot to mention this in my review of Shadowplay. This set was also reused in the Village of Shadowplay, so they're getting good use out of that set from Thine Own Self. But anyway, as far as the Star Trek treating one village like an entire planet, you're correct. That is, they do this all the time. So in that way, I'm actually willing to go with it. I'm willing to go with that this one village represents a wider population, because that's what Star Trek does all the time. Like it did this in Masterpiece Society. It's like, oh, we have to evacuate this whole colony. It's like, all I see is 20 people. It should be. But you have to imply that they're implying it's representing a lot more people. They just can't afford to show more. That's the one good thing I will say about modern Trek. Like shows like Discovery, it actually feels like a huge civilization, a huge society. They show hundreds or thousands of people. They probably use CGI effects and stuff to do that, but yeah, that is the fault of Legacy Trek. That is one of the, because they just couldn't afford it. They just couldn't afford to make it seem like a huge. So you only see 20 people at a time. So that's just a common thing with Star Trek. Let's see. And yeah, it seems like you're agreeing with me about why should they let this one colony, make a war happen where millions of people could die just because this one colony doesn't want to evacuate. Now, granted, the colony has, good reasons, and there's a history that makes it all debatable, but you also make a good point about why the hell did they settle so close to Cardassians in the first place. In fact, Admiral Nechayev even brings up, we warned them when they first settled this planet that it was in dispute with the Cardassians, maybe not a good idea, and they did it anyway. So they're kind of facing the consequences of their own fault. They're like, oh, this planet is spiritually important. It took us 200 years to find this planet. It's going to take us another 200 to find the other perfect planet. Well, it's not actually perfect if there are Cardassians there who are going to kill you for being there. So I think your 200-year search should have actually kind of sucked. and you need to do a better job. So yeah, if it takes you another 200 years, kind of your fault because you settled in the wrong planet to begin with. Sorry if that sounds insensitive, but truth hurts sometimes. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Journey's End out of 10. It's kind of rhymes. Journey's End out of 10. It's going to be a 3. Very poor. I came into this thinking I might give this episode a 5 or 4, but and this happened the last episode I reviewed as well. I had The Beholder. But the more I talked about it and the more it irks me, the more it bothers me. I feel like I'm being generous by giving it a 3 and not a 2. But like the Native American storyline was actually kind of good. I mean, the ending was kind of fake. It was like, oh, we're deciding to leave the Federation. Why didn't you do that in the first place? But other than that storyline is actually okay. And Admiral Cheoff is actually being decent. And the scene with like Picard trying to reach out to her was actually a good scene. So there are good aspects to this episode, but the Wesley stuff, I'm sorry, that's complete shit. It ruins his character. It is a giant retcon that leads to a worse retcon later on in Modern Trek, and it began here with this retcon. It is a bad episode. He's annoying. He acts like a spoiled brat, and it's totally out of character, and it ruins his character. And the Traveler is not a fucking teacher. He's just a tourist. God damn it! That's why he calls himself a traveler. Anyway. I mean, I guess you could argue that Wesley's going off to be a tourist with the Traveler, but that's clearly not what the Traveler intended for Wesley. He wanted him to improve humanity. How the fuck is he supposed to do that if he's not even there? And later, Modern Trek, he becomes like a guardian of the galaxy. But supposed to be a leader of humanity. Like a Starfleet goddamn captain. That's clearly what he was supposed to be. Clearly! Anyways, that is it for my review of Journey's End. If you did enjoy this super long video, sorry that it's so long, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all those sorts of things really help me out in the algorithm. If you'd like to really support the channel, you could support me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. Different tiers for different rewards. I do a Patreon-only series where I revisit reviews that I've already done and update them, give more in-depth thoughts. Pre-releases, all sorts of other things you can check out if you're interested. So, if you would like to support or participate in my top 10 Star Trek Next Generation episodes, top 10 best, top 10 worst, as determined by you, the viewer. You can leave a top 10 in the comment section of this video or any of my videos. Just leave a comment with your top 10 favorite Star Trek Next Generation episodes and top 10 least favorite Star Trek Next Generation episodes, or top 10 best, top 10 worst, however you want to quantify it. Leave that in the comments of any of my videos, and I will add them together with everyone's top 10s. It does make a difference what order you have your top 10 in. If you don't want to do 10, you can only think of 7, that's fine, but you can't say in any order, because the way I'm structuring this, like, I need to know, like, what order, because the ones that are higher on your top 10 will get more points, which will lead it to be higher in the overall top 10s. Anyway, if you want to participate in that, would be great. I'm definitely hoping to get more participants this time than I did with the original series one, because more the merrier sort of influence the top 10s, which I will be doing once I finish covering the Next Generation at the end of the month. So let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Let's see, where are we now? So Thursday will be my review for Blood Oath. Saturday I'll be reviewing Firstborn. Monday I'll be over on Patreon doing one of those Patreon exclusive videos revisiting my review for the Maquis parts 1 and 2, as mentioned in this episode, the next step in this whole storyline. And on Wednesday I'll be reviewing the TNG episode Bloodlines. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover, winding down, getting to the end now, close to the end of my coverage of Star Trek Next Generation, but will continue to be covering Star Trek Deep Space Nine and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.